Hello, YouTube. Just thought I'd make a video on I guess my sort of leaving or deconstruction or disbelief in the Christian religion and God concept. Just sort of a little bit of my background, and I was actually raised pretty strong Christian, I guess you'd say, being dragged to church and participating in numerous church and Bible-related activities and groups. I was also completely homeschooled until the 9th grade. I guess it would be considered a conservative, fairly strict evangelical Protestantism in orientation and theology. In the Baptist denomination, pretty far along on the fundamentalist spectrum, I guess you'd say, as far as Christians in America are concerned. But at around the age of 14, I began seriously questioning and examining, deconstructing various aspects of the faith, of God, supernatural intervention, and the power of prayer, intercessory prayer, God's presence or interaction or intervention within the world, within the universe. And I became what is known as a deist for a little while, but then landed in agnostic atheism. I feel I've since then leaned towards the naturalistic and scientific, wanting a naturalistic, scientific rational, empirical explanation for any phenomenon in the universe and that we observe. I'm not so easily swayed by arguments from personal experience and anecdotes, which is a terrible gauge of objective truth. And our psychology and neurology is known to have plenty of quirks and glitches carried through evolutionarily, and ways of misinterpreting or imagining or hallucinating our memories are not even perfectly reliable, accurate accounts of the past. In many cases, perfect recordings, and they are subject to unconscious modifications and estimations and editing, reorganizing in the moment. This can be driven by suggestion and implantation. These false memory effect or syndrome as known, that was really brought to attention by cognitive psychologist Elizabeth Loftus. One of the reasons eyewitness testimony is regarded as the least reliable form of evidence admissible in the court of law, and much is done to sort of keep eyewitnesses separated from each other so their stories don't become corrupted and their memories don't become influenced and shaped by other witnesses, as can happen in many occasions. Some of this may rise from my more high-functioning autism spectrum brain, which tends towards logical problem solving and a more analytical, inductive skepticism. Of course, you don't have to have autism or Asperger's to think critically and scientifically and be devoted to and committed to methodological naturalism and just looking at this supernatural or divine beings that are posited and postulating and seeing glaring flaws and incongruencies and just various violations of what we know to be true from physics, chemistry, biology. I mean, if I was to have a religious, quote unquote, or mystical or near-death experience, or some supposed encounter with the other side, as it is called, I would not immediately pivot to identifying and proclaiming it to be emanating from a supernatural source or agent, be it God, ghosts, apparitions, angels, goblins, leprechauns, or any other kooky mythological creatures. I would want and demand myself and others to methodically exhaust every possible conceivable source or explanatory cause that is wholly naturalistic and can be understood medically, biologically, psychologically, etc. Many have this prior entrenched belief in these other beings, in gods, which seems to allow them to bypass any critical analysis or critical faculties and jump straight right away into the arms of magical woo and non-material, non-physical phantasms, as it were. I don't get it. I'm not in the subjective psychology of these people and understand how it is that they so easily are led to these conclusions right off the bat. But it seems to be a part of our evolutionary heritage of some kind, this hyperactive agency attribution, as it is referred to. It could have provided a survival advantage in early human ancestry, hunter-gatherer times. If you assumed that the moving grass was a predator, a tiger, or snake, rather than thinking a little bit about wind, or if you thought it was some being you could more easily escape, there's no downside. Whereas if you sat and thought about it for a while, you might be liable to be prey for the saber-toothed tiger. This type of thinking, though, has led to quite terrible results, especially with regards to mental health and illnesses and disorders of the brain. As we see medieval Christians interpreting something like schizophrenia, epilepsy, seizures, dissociative identity disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, even autism or learning disabilities or what have you, as demonic possessions and witches casting their spells. Anytime there was a blight and famine or the bubonic plague, it was the result of some curse or some nebulous evil. Of course, I didn't have any understanding of microbiology, of microscopic organisms and germ theory of disease, and how this was spread, or fungus. And believe stuff that we rightfully concede as foolish superstitions and product of ignorance in a pre-enlightenment, pre-scientific revolution world, devoid of, before modern science really, telescopes and advanced instruments and technologies for measuring the inner workings of the nervous system and until more recent times, the microscopic organisms in the kingdom of single-celled bacteria, amoebas, viruses, the mechanisms of viruses, what DNA was, how viruses infect and hijack the cell's RNA to make copies of themselves. But they were committing a fallacy known as the argument of ignorance, or also the God of the gaps, which is still being used today in some circles of Christian apologetics and Islamic apologetics, I suppose. If you live in the Middle East, where that is the dominant theistic religion. And I'm very sorry if you do happen to be trapped in Pakistan or Egypt and Sudan as an atheist, agnostic, skeptic, or if you're gay or bisexual, then it's death to the infidels. And those shitholes I guess we must remember even things today which we cannot fully understand or explain completely, concisely, with exactitude in terms of science. Does not mean we jump without any reflection into notions of God and the supernatural. The classic fallacious reasoning of we don't know the exact mechanism, ideology, or process, or this or that occurrence, therefore it must be God. Or alternatively, they could state, therefore it must be ghost, therefore it must be powerful entities of the other dimensions, therefore it must be Satan, therefore it must be fairies, and we could go on and on with this ad nauseum appeal to whatever deity or enigmatic monster you want. I mean, we know about hallucinations, and they don't just occur in those diagnosed with a mental illness of a psychotic type, such as hallucination, such as, schizophrenia, or you don't have to have schizoaffective disorder to hear voices. We know about the power of suggestion and the placebo effect. We know sleep disorders that are widely experienced and well documented, and we know about pathology and what is going on. Things like sleep paralysis now, and hypnagogic states, and how our brains are kind of wired to recognize and then seek out patterns and faces that are not objectively there. What is known as visual pareidolia. But there is also auditory pareidolia. Listen to those ghost hunter shows. They have the little device where they record audio, and EVPs, I think they're called. It's really just capturing static and noise. But then they try to say that there is some voice and saying, get out or something. I never hear really in these replaying of the audio recording where it's all this white noise and static. Some clear human voice saying the words that they're saying are being said on the subtitles. Sometimes you don't hear it, but then when they put the subtitles there, you hear it. It sort of primes you to hear those words in the meaningless sound. But that would be auditory pareidolia. But yeah, just think of how in the past we didn't understand lightning or thunderstorms. We didn't understand it as a natural phenomenon of electrostatic discharges through the atmosphere with electrically charged regions. Either in the atmosphere or with one in the atmosphere and the ground, which produce electromagnetic radiation and from heat created by the rapid movement of electrons. And that the sound of thunder, the crack, is a result of a shock wave from the sudden increase in pressure, which develops as the gases in the vicinity discharge. We didn't know about the temperatures, combination of temperature and rapid upward movement of air, producing these super cool droplets that are below freezing, small ice crystals in hell, and the updraft carrying the supercooled droplets and the small ice crystals up in the cloud, while the grapple, which is more dense falling or suspended in the air, and that this movement of the precipitation collisions occur, the ice crystals being positively charged and the grapple being negatively charged. positively charged going to the upper parts of the thundercloud, and the lower parts being the negatively charged ions. Um, yeah. It's not about cloud formations or tornadoes. But, yeah. I guess one of the, even as a kid, I, never really felt God's presence. I believed, I thought of God as being there somewhere, but I didn't feel anything springing from a divine source. I never felt the Holy Spirit, as it's called, which is a big part of the really charismatic Pentecostal denominations, assemblies of God. Nor have some emotionally calming or warming, blissful comfort at the notion that God was watching over me in some way. As a little anecdote, I recollect this departure from my devout parents when they insisted my partial recovery from a very bad eczema flare-up, as I had eczema throughout my childhood, as well as allergies and pretty bad allergic reactions to a lot of things. Grasses, trees, dust, cats, everything but dog, in fact, dog hair. I tested positive for in the allergy test when I was going to take allergy drops. And I think this increase in the dosage and amount of times I was given these allergy drops per day is what led to a activation of the eczema, or played possibly a role, as well as being out in an ice storm of 2009. But I was full of scabs and red patches, and my skin was discoloring, and my arms, the creases and elbows and the backs of my leg and neck in the winter through January through March 2009. That would be 14 years ago. But they saw this as the answering of prayer, and somehow of a miraculous, divine, God-provoked nature. I was alternatively seeing this as purely episode of a sequence of events, starting with seeing a different specialist dermatologist, originally going there for light therapy, but she ended up prescribing a strict daily regimen of applying a prescription steroidal ointment after showering and then coating it in Vaseline afterwards. And there was marked improvement in this very bothersome intensely negatively affecting of my life, eczema. I remember crying on my 14th birthday over this. But yeah. I suppose the problem of evil, the problem of suffering wasn't really the main impetus or driver in creating a faith crisis, as it is called. But the problem of hell, of everlasting punishment and torture from a god, that one, as with many, I think, did kind of start the ball rolling in many ways, along with the hatred and bigotry towards homosexuals in the Christian religion, and the calling it a choice to sin, when it was clearly a biological, neuroscientifically explained sexual orientation that is not with genetic contributions. And I didn't know all of the neuroscience about the specific sex behavior related regions of the brain's anatomy and endocrine system and the hypothalamus, and Simon LeVay's studies on the interior nucleus of the interstitial nucleus of the interior hypothalamus, I think it's called, or the differences in neuronal density and trans individual brains, and the bed terminus of the some nucleus in the brain, bed nucleus of the stria terminalis, I think. And there's multiple brain regions that we can look at that are related to gender identity and sexual orientation, attraction, and these are found in living patients where we have them in fMRIs and cadavers of gay people and dissecting the brains. A lot of AIDS patients donated their bodies to science, I think. And exploration was done to find neural correlates of same-sex attraction, and we see it in the animal kingdom. Thousands of species, I don't know how many have been identified, have exclusive pair bonding with the same sex. But yeah, all that aside, I didn't get the antipathy and rage against the LGBT folks that I saw from conservative Christians, at least. I'm not going to lump the liberal Methodist and Episcopalians in with the Southern Baptist and the Pentecostals and the a lot of the Catholics, but anyway, I was also alternatively seeing, I wasn't very excited or enamored with or enthralled by the idea of the Christian heaven or the afterlife in general, this eternal paradise that rests at the center of the religion of Christianity and Islam as the ultimate end goal and the reward, being forever, sentience forever, unending, everlasting, infinite immortality. The concept of just being there in some soul form and wispy clouds in an endless, timeless loop for trillions upon trillions of years, which is still a minuscule fraction of a second in the grand scheme of infinity, where it's just, if you look at the biblical accounts, it's just serving and praising God forever, like a wind-up robot, and walking up and down some yellow brick roads, the streets paved with gold, as they all say. And they know all these elaborate details about how heaven is gonna be, and blah 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 blah. And that was all insane to me. At least the Sadducees, the Jews, didn't believe that bullshit. But there was no cause for ecstasy or exhilarating anticipation. And I was just thinking, am I Christian enough to go to heaven? Because I wasn't praying that much. There was just this, the problem of divine hiddenness, I guess. There was just no, God didn't seem to be anywhere in my life, affecting anything, affecting anyone. Prayer was just a flip of the coin. Something good happens, yay, it's answered prayer, it's divine intercession. It's something bad happens, it's just the natural, causal, completely random effects of biology. God just wasn't really concerned, I guess. It's his will and ultimate sovereignty and divine plan, and okay, but what's the use of praying to change the mind of God that's already made up? Basically, God's will, God having an active role and control, complete sovereignty of God, omnipotence, omniscience, all these qualities, and then saying that prayer works. You cannot reconcile that. Cannot. I think you end up with a sort of predeterminism and fatalism if you have an omniscient, omnipotent God, and that acting as if you have any control whatsoever in what's going to happen through prayer and petition makes no sense. But anyway, once you question and dissect this heaven and hell and the afterlife and this substance dualism, the survival and persistence of consciousness and the mind, self, personal identity, memories, the ego absent of a brain, and the neurophysiological functioning and its complete destruction and desiccation, a corpse being rotting and in the process of decomposition by bacteria and fungi and other maggots and worms and organisms if you're buried or burned up in the cremation process. As we already see with the plaques, amyloid plaques, and building up in the brain, and the tau tangles disrupting the neurons and these microtubules, and the inaccessibility of memories and the disappearance of a person, who they were, their whole identity changes and shifts. We see this with strokes and dementias and or just the ingestion of mind-altering drugs, really brain, neurochemical, neurotransmitter-altering drugs, and how this causes an effect mentally in the mind, hallucinatory or euphoria with heroin and the opioids, or a depressant with increasing the levels of GABA, the main inhibitory neurotransmitter, with alcohol consumption. This whole ideal of the non-physical, immortal, enduring soul really, well, it's one of the most dead ideals in all of theology and philosophy, as Matt Dillahunty says. But then the whole Jesus story, the atonement and the sacrificial death through crucifixion for sin and salvation, this soteriology really falls apart without the everlasting reward in the kooky candy land of heaven seems to come from our own denial of death or craving for mortality and our own just bereavement and grief over the loss of and death of those we care for, and a sort of death anxiety management strategy. But you can definitely see with the Christian heaven and hell how much it's borrowed from other myths and legends of the Greeks, with Hades and the Tartarus being very much like the hell and the Elysian fields, very much like heaven, and the hell of Zoroastrianism. And so much of Christianity is borrowed from Greek and Hellenistic ideals rather than Judaism, which had no afterlife. There was Sheol, which was the Hebrew word, is interpreted many times just to mean the grave or the pit. After you die, you go, as the book of Ecclesiastes says, into the ground to rot, just like the other animals, because you are an animal, and that's it. But anyway, then you get down to this whole everything has to have a creator. But how was God created? It's so infinitely complex of a mind, of a consciousness, basically greater than all of our supercomputers and our machines, our AI systems. But it has no creator, apparently. It has no structure or components, no evolution to how God got to be God, if you can see what I mean. There's never any mechanism or structure given how this God's mind or mental processes work. Not a brain. This God is often called immaterial, non-physical, separate from space, time, almost non-existent, you could say. How do we quantify this? How do we investigate it? How do we falsify, if we're using language of the scientific method, how we try to constantly disprove something. But then we're told that God has all these anthropomorphic properties, these things that are solely seen in human and animal minds, psychology, personhood, moods, emotions that are so obviously just us attributing our own sensibilities and proclivities and desires onto some larger source. I always maintained this strong agnosticism that even if there was a God, it would be completely incomprehensible to know its nature, what it was like, or to even ascribe any properties to this thing. But yeah, I suppose it's getting a little long, so I'll just wrap it up and maybe I'll talk about the anthropomorphic problem and the problem of what makes God God, and the structures and components and mechanics of a God that are never delivered to us by the theist. But anyway, see ya.